Get your tickets now for the Dog Stars.
It's no surprise how fast civilization can disappear. Out there, it's kill or be killed.
Jacob Elordi.
There are people out there.
They need our help.
Josh Brolin.
Shoot first and inquire afterwards.
Margaret Qualley.
Ow.
Okay, tough guy.
And Guy Pearce.
Arm up!
The Dog Stars, directed by Ridley Scott, in theaters August 28th. Get tickets now. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parents.
This is True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time. Week by week, you'll hear the true stories behind the operations that have shaped the world we live in. You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position? I'm Rhiannon Needs, and this is True Spies from SPYSCAPE Studios. The year is 1944. The month is August. In the small village of Saint-Tron, in the French Alps, a mother hangs out her washing to dry in the hot sun, while her children play around her. A cow drops to the dry earth, shot dead. Then, another high-caliber bullet rips through the air, shattering a stone wall behind the family. Within seconds, the whole village erupts into chaos. A German convoy, winding down a road that leads to the settlement, has opened fire. The mother panics as more bullets tear through her laundry, narrowly missing the children. Then, out of nowhere, a man's voice cuts through the horror, speaking in perfect French. The man, tall, handsome, and dressed in the uniform of the US Marine Corps, yells at the woman to take cover, instructing her to lie her children as flat as possible on the ground. He then turns back to face the convoy and return fire. That mysterious stranger was Major Peter Ortiz. He had been sent to France on a mission by the newly formed OSS, the precursor to the CIA, to strengthen and support the French resistance as they prepared to repel the Nazis once and for all. The only problem being, his 5-man unit had just collided with 150 heavily armed German soldiers, hungry for enemy blood.
At this point, Ortiz has seen a lot of war, living on borrowed time in certain circumstances, and he has a sense of, all right, if this is the end, I'm at peace with that. It's okay.
But Ortiz's life wasn't the only one at risk. Apart from his own men, some of whom were as young as 20, Ortiz knew that the survival of the whole village, every man, woman, and child, depended on what he did next. Ortiz was only too aware that the Germans had become increasingly ruthless in their treatment of anyone they suspected of helping the Allied forces, whether they be battle-tested resistance or everyday civilians. He had just witnessed firsthand a massacre at a nearby town, where the Nazis had burned every building to the ground, slaughtered its occupants, and even destroyed its livestock. For these were the weeks that followed D-Day, the momentous Allied beach landings that marked the beginning of the end of the Second World War for the Third Reich. And now news was spreading of a second Allied landing in the south, Operation Dragoon. This new initiative formed a pincer movement with the D-Day landings that added even more pressure to the failing Nazi war effort. Increasingly desperate to retain their captured territories in both France and Italy, the combined German military, known as the Wehrmacht, was now pursuing a scorched earth policy.
By this stage, in 1944, it's shoot 'em all, burn the villages, kill the animals. Any sign of resistance will be met with brutal revenge.
Ortiz had a stark choice before him. Stay and fight, facing certain death, or flee into the mountains, leaving the village to the wrath of the Nazis. With shots raining down on him, his men, and the hapless villagers, Ortiz collected himself and made a decision.
He decides the thing to do is to surrender and get the Germans to agree to take that surrender and in return not to destroy the village.
This was an extraordinary gamble. Some would call it suicide. Hitler's commando order of 1942 had explicitly decreed that any Allied soldiers found behind enemy lines were to be killed on sight. And if Ortiz and his men wound up dead, how would they know whether the village had survived or not? To understand the thinking behind this high-risk decision, we need to understand the man who made it. For the last few years, two writers have painstakingly researched and assembled Peter Ortiz's incredible story. A man they soon discovered was one of World War II's most colourful and courageous figures.
I'm Katie Sanders. I'm a journalist in the States who writes often about World War II and intergenerational connections to it, including my own.
My name is Nicholas Reynolds. I'm a history PhD, and I have been an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, and I've served in the CIA. My last job in the CIA was as the historian for the CIA Museum, which gave me an opportunity to explore the history of OSS in World War II.
True Spies is fortunate to have Katie and Nick, co-authors of a book which tells Peter Ortiz's incredible story.
The book, Ortiz's War, comes out on August 25th from HarperCollins.
Peter Ortiz was born Pierre Julien Ortiz on July 5, 1913, to a French-born Spanish father and a Swiss-American mother. After his parents split when he was 4, it was decided that the boy should be educated in France and Switzerland, setting the young Peter up for a life of privilege and comfort. His father, Philippe, was a Paris Vogue executive, and it was his intention that his son would want for nothing. Peter, however, had other plans. Athletic, restless, and bored by formal schooling, he sought a life of adventure from the start, whatever the consequences.
He was not a school guy. There's a report on him that says not a good candidate for a desk job ever.
After a failed attempt to run away to become a merchant seaman, Peter Ortiz finally succeeded in dropping out of formal education when he turned 18. His destination? The French Foreign Legion.
And so what I see in young Ortiz joining the Foreign Legion is a little bit of rebellion against this upbringing. Can I do this? So I've had this comfortable upbringing. Can I meet the challenge of being a French Foreign Legionnaire?
The French Foreign Legion, as our military-minded listeners will know, was quite possibly the hardest, most elite regiment operating anywhere in the world at that time. Notorious for its unorthodox, no-questions-asked recruiting methods, the Foreign Legion had earned a reputation for offering refuge to some of the most dangerous men on the planet. Once accepted, recruits discovered the regimental training itself to be intense and, at times, brutal. Successful graduates were guaranteed deployment in some of the world's most lethal theatres of war. In other words, this was the opposite of the cushy life Ortiz Sr. had envisioned for his son. Inevitably, Peter's decision horrified his father. So the young legionnaire invited Philippe out to visit him where he was deployed in North Africa.
Peter Ortiz shows his father, okay, actually, there's something worth setting the record straight about. The French Foreign Legion isn't what you think it is, a group of derelicts. It's actually, there's some really laudable stuff going on.
It's in the desert, it's in the mountains. They're fighting tribesmen. It's essentially a French colonial war, and aspects of it are not pretty. But it's where Ortiz cuts his teeth and becomes really a seasoned infantryman.
By the late 1930s, Ortiz had proven himself to be an outstanding, yet unconventional soldier, highly skilled in guerrilla warfare. His dashing looks, his height, well over 6 feet, and flamboyant dress sense were matched by his sharp mind and boundless courage in combat. However, his path was not yet set. After his first stint in the regiment, the call of his old life prompted him to turn down a 5-year commission. But, as he tried to adjust back to civilian life, the call to adventure remained strong. Perhaps too strong.
Get your tickets now for the Dog Stars.
It's no surprise how fast civilization can disappear. Out there, it's kill or be killed.
Jacob Elordi,
There are people out there.
They need our help.
Josh Brolin,
Shoot first and inquire afterwards.
Margaret Qualley,
Okay, tough guy.
and Guy Pearce.
Arm up!
The Dog Stars, directed by Ridley Scott, in theaters August 28th. Get tickets now. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parents.
This episode is brought to you by Disney. What does it take to build a world people never want to leave? In Disney World Builders, Academy Award and Emmy-nominated filmmaker Leslie Iwerks takes audiences inside the creative journeys of some of Disney's most influential storytellers, featuring exclusive interviews with James Cameron, Jon Favreau, Kevin Feige, and more. This new documentary reveals the imagination, innovation, and storytelling that continue to inspire generations and shape entertainment. Coming to Disney Plus on August 20th.
From what we know, Ortiz's attempts to adjust to civilian life and reconnect with his mother, Mary Louise, were unsuccessful. It was clear from the outset that conventional upper-middle-class existence was not for him. With no notable qualifications outside his military record, the 25-year-old wound up getting embroiled with a circus and developing some unexpected new skills as an animal trainer. He soon started running shows for tourists, which offered him his first taste of the entertainment industry. It wouldn't be his last. But all the while, Ortiz was well aware that the storm clouds of another global conflict were gathering. A conflict that he would be irresistibly drawn to. With Hitler's invasion of Poland in September 1939, he seized the opportunity to return to combat.
He loves the Foreign Legion. He loves the other legionnaires. He loves serving with them. And when the war breaks out in 1939, he's visiting his mom in California, and he says, hey, I got to go back and be with my guys.
But his journey back to action would be anything but plain sailing.
He becomes a prisoner of war. He's pretty badly wounded. He's surgically operated on by a German who pities him medically.
Which is something of an understatement. Ortiz hadn't even reached Europe before his ship was attacked and sunk by a German U-34 submarine. This incident did more than add to his growing list of near-death experiences. It focused his mind on a real, authentic enemy for the first time.
And then later on, he says, I am fighting against Nazism.
With renewed determination, Ortiz managed to rejoin his comrades in the Foreign Legion and was assigned to the recently formed 11th Foreign Infantry Regiment, based in North Africa. Contemporary accounts have Ortiz throwing himself back into the action and repeatedly, perhaps recklessly, exposing himself to extreme danger. And again, the young soldier found himself singled out for uncommon acts of valor and the risks he was prepared to take to inflict lasting damage on the enemy. However, in late June of 1940, his run of luck ran out. Returning from a sortie to destroy a German ammunition dump, Ortiz was hit in the back and hip by enemy fire. For a while, it looked like he may have been permanently paralyzed. Unable to retreat back to his base, he was taken prisoner. It was clear to anyone that without immediate medical intervention, Ortiz would die. To start with, no one seemed that bothered. With his life ebbing away, a young German surgeon suddenly stepped forward. Ortiz's complex wounds intrigued him, and perhaps out of professional curiosity more than compassion, the surgeon performed an operation that unquestionably saved Ortiz's life. Out of immediate danger, Ortiz was now officially a POW. In captivity, Ortiz's sense of the horrors being committed by the Nazi war machine was sharpened. He soon realized that Jewish prisoners were being treated considerably worse than their non-Jewish counterparts. From food to basic hygiene, Jewish prisoners were being denied essential human rights. When Ortiz protested to the camp's commanding officer, he found himself confined to the Jewish part of the compound. But Ortiz was not the kind of soldier who was prepared to just stay put. 4 unsuccessful escape attempts followed. Finally, in March 1941, aided by a Carmelite nun, Ortiz finally managed to escape his German captors. Under the Geneva Convention, seriously sick soldiers had to be repatriated. The nun offered to help him in the most unexpected way, by poisoning him. She started plying him with potions of her own concoction, which he willingly drank until he was so unwell, the Germans had no choice but to send him back to France. From there, under doctor's orders, he would travel home to America.
He needs some time to recover back in the States, but he doesn't want to take that time. When he docks in the States, he's, again, pretty activated, aware of what's going on in Europe and ready to fight. And, how can he get back into it when everyone else is saying, be patient, he says, I'm going to go enlist in the Marines.
In the months since his capture, the geopolitical map in Europe had changed beyond recognition. The French, under Marshal Pétain, had entered into an armistice with Hitler, surrendering Paris and other parts of the north in return for what was named a free zone in the south. However, it was evidently clear that this deal favored the Germans far more than it protected the French. For a small minority, including Ortiz, Pétain had surrendered France's sovereignty without a proper fight. To these French patriots, Pétain's capitulation was unforgivable. In its wake, pockets of armed resistance started to grow up all over the country, composed of passionate, brave, and deeply committed rebels determined to repel the invaders at any cost. But it wasn't just Europe that was under attack.
He docks in the United States on December 8, 1941, which is the day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And one of the first things he does is go to a draft board and sign up for the draft.
In the early years of the war, despite repeated pleas from Winston Churchill, among others, the United States had resisted entering the fray. But now, following the Japanese attack on American soil so close to the mainland, the Americans had finally committed to the fight. Recruiting stations across the country were suddenly flooded with young men eager to volunteer for military service. It's interesting to note that Ortiz downplayed his previous escapades with the Foreign Legion when joining up. His training, combat experience, not to mention the medals he had already accumulated for valor, would have easily placed him in the elite officer class. Instead, he got in line and re-entered military life as an ordinary infantryman. Which is not to say that he was the picture of abject modesty when he showed up at the recruiting office.
He's got a pinky ring, he's got a Cartier tank watch, and he smokes cigarettes French style, right? The one picture we have of him on that day suggests sort of a languid, arrogant, I've been there approach. So it must have been quite something to be the clerk at the board, and you've got all these 17-year-olds, and then you've got this gentleman.
It's fair to say the Marine recruiters were, initially, more than a little wary of this new arrival.
So he's got some of his papers with him, but he doesn't have everything. So there's a little tiny bit of, could this all be true on the part of the Marine Corps?
The Marines, nonetheless, welcomed Ortiz into their ranks. It quickly became clear to his commanding officers, however, that there was something utterly unique about this new recruit. After a debriefing in Washington, D.C., the higher-ups scratched their heads as to how best to deploy this extraordinary soldier. Luckily for Ortiz, the nascent Office of Strategic Services, or OSS as it was known, was actively looking for maverick types to build up its ranks of intelligence operatives. By this stage of the story, it should be clear to our listeners that Ortiz was ideal material for such an organization. The only problem being that the Marines had already sent him back to serve in North Africa. Worse still, he had been injured again. While officially deployed as a military observer, Ortiz had violated the rules of engagement and had found himself in direct contact with the enemy. His reward? Bullet wounds in the hand and leg, and orders to return to America. Despite his protests, Ortiz had no choice but to travel back to Washington in April 1943. But this time, the US military were ready for him. Still in its infancy, the OSS had to rely heavily on its European counterparts to train its fledgling operatives. Ortiz was promptly packed off to the UK for training.
Which he does pretty good-naturedly as far as we can tell. And he's got to learn how to jump British style, right? He's learned how to jump French style, he's learned how to jump Marine Corps style, and now the British say, no, you need to do it our way.
The Allied intelligence units wanted to support the French resistance as much as possible. But with a near blackout on information coming out of France at this time, there was very little concrete information to go on. The only option was to deploy reconnaissance missions into France itself, where OSS agents could assess what was happening on the ground, acquire the necessary intelligence, and then figure out exactly how to best assist the resistance from within.
This French resistance bucket, it's actually divided up into many different circuits and networks. And particularly in the regions that they're looking at, that Ortiz is dropping into, there's a question of, we need to arm them, we need to assess them, we need to mobilize and figure out, in support of what will hopefully be a successful D-Day, how can the French resistance support in the lead up? And so Ortiz and his Union comrades are tasked with trying to figure out what the situation is on the ground, get back before D-Day, and then go from there.
And so it was that Ortiz found himself parachuted into the Southern Alps, the only American working alongside 2 French soldiers and a British SOE agent. The mission had been given the name Union 1. With his strong military pedigree and flawless command of the local dialect, Ortiz was an invaluable addition to the team. As we've already mentioned, the French resistance was anything but a single, unified entity at this stage of the war. When the 4 Union 1 operatives landed, they still had no idea how they were going to be received by the local partisans, who in this region went under the name of the Maquis.
So the Maquis are generally associated with the people who are living off the land. These are the half-trained or completely untrained, in many cases, men who are on the run from the Germans. So they're essentially, their qualification for being in the resistance is they're fugitives. And so you've got to take it from there and turn a fugitive into a soldier of some sort.
Which was easier said than done. While the Maquis possessed no shortage of courage and enthusiasm, they lacked discipline, training, money, food, and, most importantly, weapons. As Ortiz and his team went from town to town assessing the rebels, they sent increasingly urgent requests back to their commanding officers for supply drops. While these proved invaluable to the success of the resistance in disrupting the Wehrmacht's efforts, they also drew unwanted attention to the fact that, clearly, the Allies had penetrated the south and were active in the area. None of which deterred Ortiz. In fact, it seemed to have the opposite effect. Whilst fulfilling his duties for the OSS, our hero wasted no time in seeking out side missions, many of which were, shall we say, not officially sanctioned. The sole purpose of these sorties, it seemed, was to bait the Nazis even more. And in doing so, observers at the time could see Ortiz, who by now had anglicized his name to Peter, was evolving into something closer to a James Bond-type figure than a conventional intelligence officer. And rather than shy away from such notoriety, it seems that Ortiz actively leaned into it.
He has lots of different covers, IDs. These things kind of come fairly naturally to him. He has some training. And he actually goes as far as to say, I know this network is sort of blown my cover. I'm going to be recalled soon. My time is almost up. So I'm going to use this opportunity.
Ortiz even took it on himself to take the fight directly to the Germans.
On one occasion, goes into a German nightclub that he's been spying at. He's been posing in these different personas and roles, and he uses that opportunity to actually go with these Germans he's been drinking with, these officers who he's come to know a bit, order them a round of drinks, and instead of hailing Hitler, he's had one too many toasts to Hitler. First of all, he flashes under his raincoat his Marine uniform, so he's worn it in. He knows these guys are unarmed, and he's armed, pointing his gun on them, and he says, now we're going to toast to the President of the United States. And they all think that they're about to, see the end, or at least see his gun, and he doesn't shoot.
In his unpublished personal record of the event, Ortiz explained that he was only able to get out of this confrontation alive because the Germans had assumed there must have been dozens more OSS agents surrounding the club. They had justifiably calculated that there was no way Ortiz would have attempted such a stunt without considerable backup. But in reality, there was just one other person involved, a solo resistance officer standing by with a getaway vehicle.
If I were running his mission, I'd say, listen, young man, you are not being paid to go into the bars and harass the Germans. We pay you to do other things. So, yes, for a conservative mission manager or slightly more conventional mission manager, people would be putting the brakes on.
It was only a matter of time before Ortiz's antics became known to the higher-ups. And with his identity now compromised, they started to worry that their D-Day preparations would also be put at risk. So Ortiz was, once again, recalled.
They want him back. They want OSS headquarters to hear from him and see him. They say, we're going to send a plane to get you out. And again, this isn't like text you, easy communication. They've risked a lot to communicate this way. And he says, I'm coming, but I'm coming on my own terms. I'm going to make my own way out.
Ortiz had already assisted a 4-man RAF crew escape when their plane had been downed by German anti-aircraft fire earlier in the mission. Now, as he reached the city of Valence and looked for his own escape route out of France, he ran into an American pilot who had been shot down and was desperate for a way home, which is where, for Katie, the story gets personal.
I actually had a piece of my grandfather's B-24 Liberator, the cover loop of the antenna, sort of in my parents' attic growing up, and it was painted black, which was unusual. These big aluminum warbirds were usually silver. And so I learned, pulling at this thread, that my grandfather had been flying a night mission, solo, low-level moonlit missions for the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the forerunner to the CIA.
Katie's grandfather, whose name was Lieutenant Murray Simon, had managed to so far escape capture and get himself funneled into Valence at exactly the same moment Ortiz arrived there. It was a stroke of good fortune that saved Simon's life.
My grandfather was shot down May 6th, and they get back to England on a wild journey that includes the stolen Gestapo staff card and trains under the noses of Nazis and trek through the Pyrenees that they don't wish on others. There's Spain, then Gibraltar, then they get back to England, with 4 days to spare until D-Day.
In any other story, this daring escape would be the centerpiece of the tale. But Ortiz's most important mission, the one that would forever secure his legacy as one of the great heroes of World War II, was yet to come. His feet had barely touched down on British soil again before he received his next orders. The mission, Union 2, was to send him straight back into the French Alps to help the Maquis prepare for the Allies' now imminent invasion of the South. The crucial second wave of the D-Day operation that was just days away from being launched. But Union 2 bore one crucial difference to its predecessor. This time, Ortiz was in charge.
Union 1, he was technically the second or the third in command. So Union 2, he's the man, and what he says is what his team does. And they pair up with a French unit led by a man who's something like Ortiz on the French side. And he's got a battalion, basically, of fighters. And within that battalion, he's got a company who are basically trained French soldiers. They're mountain troops. And they go on a mission starting around the 11th of August. And they're going to the aid of other resistors who have engaged the Germans in a valley nearby.
The France Ortiz was now entering was very different to the one he had just left. As the shockwaves of D-Day spread throughout the Third Reich, the orders came from the Führer to double down on eliminating the French resistance in every quarter. No stone was to be left unturned. Ortiz and his men were being parachuted into some of the most dangerous territory imaginable.
The valley we're talking about, it's a major supply route running up to the Italian border, so it's an evacuation route, and it's also a resupply route, so it's crucial for them to hold this route, and it runs through the terrain that we're talking about.
Which, in practical terms, means the Germans were more alert than ever to parachute drops in the region. On July the 31st, 1944, the BBC's French service broadcast the following phrase: "The vegetable gardener is watering the lettuce." To those in the know, this was a coded message alerting the Maquis to the impending arrival of Ortiz and his 7-man team. But before Ortiz and his men could engage the enemy, disaster struck. One of the jumpers, a man named Perry, had landed alongside the others on the plateau at Vercors, with the Maquis fighters waiting to greet him. Only this particular jumper never got up. His parachute had failed to open. Newly married, Perry was one of the youngest men on the mission. And now he was dead. Was this an omen of what was to come? Another jumper, named LaSalle, had also been injured. And without having advanced a single yard, Ortiz's team was suddenly down from 7 to 5. But there was no time to mourn. Alongside the soldiers, the Allied bombers had dropped over 900 cylinders containing food, money, and munitions. Ortiz and his team immediately set to work helping their new resistance friends to squirrel them away before the Germans were alerted. The following day, Ortiz and his men returned to the site for Perry's funeral. This was their only chance to let out some of the strong feelings that had accompanied his death. Their duty to their fallen comrade discharged, it was back to business. But hanging over everything was uncertainty as to when, and possibly if, the rumoured Allied assault on southeastern German positions in the Alps was going to happen. Ortiz's opposite number in the Maquis, a man named Jean Boulle, had made no attempt to hide his frustration that Ortiz and his team had failed to bring any further certainty over the impending assault. Boulle and his men were hungry for battle. Maintaining patience and discipline was getting harder each day.
One little technical fact to keep in mind, Ortiz doesn't have a radio, right? So he needs to get back to headquarters where there's a radio that says, hey, here's what we need you to do. The troops are going to come from the south on this axis, and we need you to support them on that axis. So that's why he's moving fairly fast in another direction as soon as he gets this news.
Desperate for instructions so they could lock in a strategy, Ortiz diverted his men towards the small alpine village named Santron. As you'll recall from the start of this episode, Santron was situated just off the N90, the crucial access route that the Wehrmacht relied on for resupplying its troops and, if pushed, escaping from the Allied invasion. Ortiz wanted to be as close to it as possible, so that he and his resistance comrades could take control of the N90 effectively and decisively. Which brings us back to where our story began.
Get your tickets now for the Dog Stars.
It's no surprise how fast civilization can disappear. Out there, it's kill or be killed.
Jacob Elordi,
There are people out there.
They need our help.
Josh Brolin,
Shoot first and inquire afterwards.
Margaret Qualley,
Okay, tough guy.
and Guy Pearce.
Arm up!
The Dog Stars, directed by Ridley Scott, in theaters August 28th. Get tickets now. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parents.
It's a fluid situation. He spends a lot of time just looking and watching before moving. And so he's hopeful that the Germans have come and gone. And then he goes to Central and hears something similar.
Confident that they could proceed without coming to the attention of the enemy, Ortiz directed his men onto the surrounding ring road that intersected with the N90.
They're essentially proceeding north. They've gone through the village and they're getting ready to cross this N90 supply line and escape route. And there's a German convoy that is going from left to right, which would be roughly northeast. The two groups going in different directions encounter each other at this major route that the Germans are on. The Germans are in trucks. There's probably something like 150 Germans. They got machine guns mounted in the cabs of the trucks, and there's Ortiz and his merry band of 6 men who basically have infantry weapons, right? Fairly light infantry weapons. Neither side wants this, right? Ortiz wants to get back to where there's communication. The Germans want to get to this town, and this engagement, as they call it, just erupts, right? It's not something anybody wants, but it erupts. And the right thing for Ortiz and his men to do is get away from this exposed terrain and fall back into the village where they have some cover among the houses and the stone walls.
There's only one problem. As we heard at the start of this episode, the village is populated with civilians who had no way of defending themselves against the Nazi aggressors. As the heavy machine gun fire of the German convoy ripped through the village, Ortiz's team split up. 3 of his men retreated into the nearby forest, leaving just him and 2 others to work out what to do next. Ortiz knew the moment had come when his leadership was to be tested like never before. Adding to the chaos, several of the villagers started to make direct appeals to him, begging him not to leave them to the mercy of the Nazis. Everyone in the region knew that, unprotected, the villagers would be subjected to the same gruesome fate as others who had aided the Allies. Total annihilation.
We have that from 2 or 3 sources where the villagers are appealing, and it's easier to appeal to Ortiz since he speaks French. Please, just go somewhere else, anywhere else. We don't want to die, especially not at this stage of the war.
Ortiz steadies himself and turns to one of his colleagues. He points to his white undershirt and asks him to remove it. The soldier looks at him, confused, and then the penny drops. Ortiz is going to surrender.
He has these 2 men with him who are OSS Marines. Again, the guys in their 20s, whole life ahead of them. And so he takes a moment to say to these Marines by his side who are under his command, here's what I'm going to do. I can cover for you, he offers. And they say, sir, we are Marines. What you do, we do.
It's worth taking a moment to note 2 things here. The first is Ortiz's extraordinary poise under intense pressure. Remember, this whole decision-making process was taking place while 150 German guns were firing at Ortiz, his men, and the unarmed villagers. Secondly, Ortiz himself was clearly such an inspirational leader that his men were willing to stay with him, despite him offering an out. And at this stage of the battle, it was far more likely that they would die at the hands of the Nazis than survive. But death at the hands of the Nazis was an outcome Ortiz refused to accept, whatever the odds. There had to be a way to save the village and his men. Waving the white T-shirt, Ortiz stepped out into the firing line and started walking towards the German position. But the bullets kept coming.
The really cinematic thing about that scene is that the German in charge sees this. They realize what he's doing, but they can't really believe it, that he's sacrificing himself. And so the German in charge offers Ortiz a cigarette.
Ortiz looks at the cigarette in the outstretched hand of the German commander.
Ortiz politely declines and then takes out his own. And again, you have all the people of Centron watching this, and everyone is just shocked.
It was an extraordinary gamble. Ortiz was on the Gestapo's most wanted list, and while there was no indication that the German commander had recognized him, yet there was every chance that his height, good looks, and flawless French would give Ortiz away. Despite all of this, refusing the cigarette and taking out his own was an act of self-assurance designed to indicate to his German counterpart that this negotiation was to be conducted as equals. Ortiz took a deep drag and put forward his offer. Spare the village, and you can take me and my men prisoner. But the German commander was having none of it.
Yeah, he's really bad.
The German commander was convinced Ortiz was lying about how many troops he had hiding in the village. Such was the ferocity of the OSS soldiers' fight back when the Germans first attacked. The commander believed their number must run into the dozens. For a moment, it looked like Ortiz's plan was going to fail.
Ortiz really feels his nobility obligates him, the pull towards the vulnerable, and I just think it's really potent to think about it that way.
It was exactly in moments such as these that Ortiz showed what he was really made of. His sense of duty towards the vulnerable was, it seems, a non-negotiable. He was not going to let these people down. And his gamble was all the greater for the fact that the German officer would have already received news of the Allied invasion. He would, in turn, have been under his own pressure to wipe out this pocket of resistance and the town that was sheltering them. While the guns remained silent, the German commander considered Ortiz's plea for a moment longer. And then, finally, he nodded. He'd accepted the American's offer as genuine.
He basically invites him to get into the staff car and ride together into captivity. They've been trying to kill each other, and now they're going to smoke cigarettes and ride in a staff car off into the sunset.
But there was still the issue of the villagers. Ortiz wasn't going to move an inch till he received a cast-iron guarantee that the people of Centron, every single one of them, would be spared. The German commander finished his cigarette and stared at Ortiz. And then, a nod, a smile, and a handshake.
Germans drive back down this road with him in the car, and so he passes the town and sees it hasn't been burned and that the people seem to be going about their normal everyday business.
Ortiz could allow himself the briefest moment of relief. Against immeasurable odds, he had managed to appeal to the better angels of the commander's nature, and a horrific massacre had been prevented. But the celebrations were short-lived. It was inevitable that their Nazi captors would discover that Ortiz and his men were not ordinary infantrymen, as their uniforms suggested, but OSS Commandos, which would compel their captors to execute them without trial. And then, not for the first time in Ortiz's career, luck intervened.
One of the outstanding things that happens now is the appearance in the story of a German whose name we do know, who's Major Johann Kolb. And Major Johann Kolb likes Ortiz, finds him a kindred spirit, and decides to protect him from the Gestapo that comes snooping around.
It's impossible to underestimate what this encounter meant for Ortiz and his men. Their captors had already become suspicious, and Major Kolb quickly saw his opportunity to step in.
Who are these Allied soldiers? What are they doing here? This just doesn't fit the normal script. And Kolb says, these are my prisoners and I will take care of them. Kolb is a guy who knows the story. He knows what Ortiz has been up to. He tells him, hey, we know what you were doing over here and over there. You talk to these people, you talk to those people. And even though he knows Ortiz is a commando, by the German definition, he decides to save him.
Peter Ortiz's war was finally over. Well, almost. Let's face it, it's not as if Ortiz was going to just play the role of well-behaved POW. Once again, as he was shuffled between various prison camps, he made several escape attempts. But this time, events bigger than him were determining his fate. As 1944 came to an end, the Nazi war effort had started to collapse, and in late April of 1945, Ortiz and all the other POWs were liberated by advancing Allied forces. They made it to Paris just in time to join in with the V-Day celebrations on May the 8th. However, it was with mixed feelings that Ortiz would face the peace. Despite having not one but 2 Navy Crosses to his name, the US Marines' second highest honor, Ortiz was still haunted by the memories of his previous efforts at reintegrating into civilian life. As it turns out, he'd made a useful wartime friend in the legendary film director and fellow war hero John Ford. Keen to render his films as authentically as possible, and nostalgic for the camaraderie of the military, Ford invited Ortiz out to Hollywood, as first an advisor and then as an actor. Ortiz accepted and moved to Los Angeles. He even appeared alongside John Wayne, one of the biggest movie stars in the world. But none of it lived up to the life-or-death thrills of active service.
I see him not unlike other heroes. They're extremely good at what they do during the war. They have a sixth sense for combat, and then after the war, for whatever reason, they can't quite get their footing. They can't find the same momentum that they had during the war.
Ortiz never really cashed in on his wartime achievements. He even chose to shun a reunion held at Saint-Tron to commemorate his and his team's role in saving its population from the wrath of their Nazi occupiers. But he couldn't avoid recognition for what he had done entirely. In November 1949, Ortiz was tricked into entering a recording studio in Hollywood to, he thought, read a proclamation for the annual Marine Corps birthday celebration. But in fact, it was an episode of a new radio show called This Is Your Life, and to Ortiz's complete surprise, this particular edition was dedicated to him and his wartime exploits. Amongst the people there to pay tribute was Katie's grandfather, Murray Simon.
My grandfather is selling tools in Brooklyn, New York at this point, and puts on his suit and flies to LA, and you hear the reunion, and there's a great picture of them with just, imagine when you're in the middle of occupied France and James Bond comes to your rescue, and then a couple years later you're on a Hollywood set reuniting with him.
After the war, Ortiz married and pursued a conventional life as best he could. Despite being plagued by his wartime injuries, he was always on the lookout to discharge that still burning sense of duty to the vulnerable, whether it was aiding hurricane victims in Mexico or, aged 72, volunteering to exchange himself for a hostage held by terrorists in the Middle East. But his desire to commit one final offer of service was informed by more than his innate sense of justice. By the late 1980s, Ortiz was dying. And true to form, he wanted to carry out one last mission before he went. But his hostage exchange offer was rejected, and he finally slipped away on May the 16th, 1988. Accompanied by 2 of his surviving colleagues from Union 2, Ortiz was buried, with full regimental honors, in Arlington Cemetery. 4,000 miles away, in Santron, flags were lowered to half-mast. If you were to visit Santron today, the only reference to Peter Ortiz is a simple plaque hanging to the right of the entrance door of the town hall, placed there at a commemoration service in 1994. But however much he downplayed his extraordinary wartime exploits at the time, Ortiz's legacy lives on. Thanks to both Katie and Nick's painstaking research, allowing us to celebrate this man for the unequivocal hero that he was.
I think he's essentially someone who says, whatever Hitler's going to try to do to the Jews, he's going to have to try to do to me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, keep an eye out for the full story in Ortiz's War by Katie Sanders and Nicholas Reynolds. And make sure you join us next time for another rendezvous with true spies. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you're enjoying this podcast, please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?